The Vietnam War was an absolutely brutal time in human history that was full of many accounts of just human atrocity, a lot of paranoia amongst society for those that were involved within the war and those that were on the outside spectating, and most importantly for the idea of horrors being out there. There were a lot of just crazy and wild stories by veterans and soldiers about unexplainable phenomenon and wild things that they saw out there in the deep, deep jungles in that bloody battlefield.
Soldiers returning from the jungles of Vietnam appear to have encountered something else. Strange creatures which defy rational explanation.
So of course it makes sense that a horror author would want to take place a story there because of the amount of just cryptid, ghost, supernatural, paranormal stories that were said by veterans. And a lot of them happen to be stuff that would basically make you go white in the face, make your hair turn white, and send shivers down your spine. So today I'm going to be looking at a horror book that's just like that. And what do you know? It's by one of my new favorite authors. Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night, it is your boy, the Horrorlander, and I am here once again to talk about one of my new favorite horror authors that just hits every single note that I want him to hit, and that is Tim Curran. Tim Curran is what I like to call a real fan of horror. You can tell all of his different inspirations, the thing that really gets him going, and on top of that, he loves doing a particular subgenre of horror that I'm a big fan of, which is creature features. I mean, damn, that's like introducing me to a girl who likes eating caramel drizzled funnel cake while she's watching Creepshow. I'll be like, where the hell have you been all my life? The reason I love Tim Curran so much is he manages to write books that are genuinely scary. He writes some really brutal and horrific scenes. He's got a real good way of describing gore and slimy, oozy, scary, imaginative monsters that you'll never seen before in other types of media. He's got a way to build tension, he's got a way to build atmosphere, and on top of that, he can really get you into his imagination. You have a good way to visualize the worlds that he's talking about, and that's what makes him truly haunting to the reader. And I'm going to carry out my agenda, man. Listen, I am a missionary when it comes to Tim Curran's work. However many people I can get his work out there to, I think this dude should be way more famous. I think he should be just as famous as some of the biggest authors like Stephen King. Because if you had movies being adapted based on this guy's works, yo, you would have some horrific scenes on big cinema movies, man. So yeah, Tim Curran is an absolute legend and gem. So it only makes sense that I wanted to read two of his novellas, which ended up getting paired together in some bundle packages in certain places. And those two novellas are the one that I'm covering today and the one that I'll cover in the next video. The one I'm covering today is called Headhunter, and as my introduction explains, yes, this is a creature feature urban legend kind of horror story that takes place during the Vietnam War. So without further ado, let's get into this review. And just first and foremost, I guess as a preview to my thoughts, this was one of his weaker works. But that being said, despite being one of his weaker works, which that's an opinion that not only I faced, but it seems that other people faced as well, when I had read on Goodreads reviews. It still manages to have a lot of cool moments in it, and it overall still ended up with like a fairly decent score. So if this is considered to be one of his weaker works, that makes me very happy as well. That is a W in my book because I've read better stuff by him that's fantastic, and this still had moments in it that I was like, wow, man, that is great. So the story opens up with a reporter who's out during the Vietnam War and basically is snapping pictures and journal article stories about the different atrocities and activities that are going on during this war period. And his name is Mac. Mac is not your typical reporter. He's often in the battlefield and the front lines with a lot of special forces units, the Vietnamese soldiers, and he often even has to engage within firefights and battles with the enemy Vietnamese as well. So because he's kind of like a pro reporter, he's active in the field, a lot of other people respect him and sort of let him on the front lines, give him their own experiences, give him their own stories. So he's really like kind of like a part of the platoon and battalion in this case. You open up with them at a village that's basically had a bunch of Viet Cong soldiers killed. The village is burning to the ground after they've basically destroyed a lot of it, and they're rounding up a bunch of the villagers who were left astray there. These villagers, as you find out, are often tortured and abused by many different forces. This includes the the Vietnamese forces. This includes the other foreign military parties that come by these villages, and sometimes even US soldiers who are too much into their head and feeding into the propaganda of the war. They oftentimes abuse these villagers just in the heart of the moment. So these are a very tortured, vulnerable group of people, and you see sort of Mac's perspective and even the soldiers' perspective throughout the story involving these natives. As they're rounding up some of these villagers and trying to interrogate and get information out of them, there is one who is an old man who had his eyes gouged out, so he's basically blind, and his wife has a large scar that has slit closed one of her eyes, and you can tell that they were victims of a lot of different battles and stuff that came by these villages. And all of a sudden, the blind old man starts laughing hysterically in an insanely loud voice that echoes throughout the deep, dark jungle that is surrounding them 360 degrees by the village. And the old woman starts basically rambling off in her native tongue directly at Mac, the reporter who's the protagonist of the story. An intelligence officer that's a part of their team basically then comes up and tries translating some of the stuff that she's saying, because the old man and the woman are basically giving all the other soldiers the creeps, especially Mac, who can't understand what their manic behavior is about. The intelligence officer deciphers that the old lady is talking about something that is smelling Mac and about to find these soldiers and find these guys. She describes this entity as the Headhunter, or otherwise known as the devil that hunts heads. Yes, so she's talking about some sort of creature or supernatural entity or something that apparently, from what the intelligence officer knows, is said to be an urban legend about some boogeyman giant-like figure that lives throughout the jungle and basically, as described, is a headhunter. It will kill victims, hunt down people, and claim their heads as trophies. The old woman basically continues and ominously saying and foreshadowing that Mac knows that there's a certain presence out there in the jungle. He can feel it, he can smell it, he can sense it. And those feelings are being reciprocated by the thing that's soon going to be hunting him down. He, of course, treats this as crazy talk, but as the story goes on and you get introduced to some of the more atrocities and gunfights and activities that are going on during this war and some of the other special forces units and Green Berets and stuff of that nature that Mac gets to interview and talk to, he meets certain people who have some ominous stories involving what's going on in Vietnam at this point. He talks to one soldier who basically describes how he's worked with guys who have told stories about some of the tours that they've done here in Vietnam during this time. And some of them have described wild tales about giant snakes that you couldn't comprehend, man-eating tigers, killer insects, your typical sort of stuff when you're out in unexplored hearts of the jungle. But then it takes a turn as he starts telling stories about local urban legends that the native indigenous people talk about involving wild men, these Sasquatch ape-like figures that will be up in the highlands basically watching you, smelling horrible, looking ferocious, and basically scaring away a bunch of different villagers and soldiers. He also describes a story about how he had one of his friends who was a hard knocks fighter pilot flying over some shoreline in Vietnam, and this is not the type of guy to bullshit, and he claimed that he had saw some crocodile-like thing that was 40 foot long with flippers that had jumped out, grabbed two local fishermen, pulled them into the water, and basically swam away. So Vietnam is a place of like creature of the week stuff. Everybody has different supernatural ghost stories, monster stories. Some of them could be urban legends meant to scare kids or scare away other people. But there could also be the fact that some of these places are really unexplored, and you don't know what evil forces might be lurking in there. When Mac then inquires about the Headhunter, the figure called the devil that hunts heads, to this friend of his who's a special forces soldier, all of a sudden the guy gets this misty eye in his look, and he starts gripping the table hard, so hard that there becomes white spots on his knuckles, and when he eases up, he has a little smile that comes on his face, and he describes one of the indigenous Vietnamese people who fights alongside their team. One of those guys described a story that when he was a kid, this thing, the Headhunter, had actually appeared in his village, and its hulking figure and boogeyman-like appearance that he thought was just meant to scare away kids was here in a tangible form, and it actually decapitated the village elder and walked on its merry way. The Special Forces soldier kind of just took it with a grain of salt until one day him and that native guy were out tracking through the jungle, and they found this huge footprint that was twice the soldier's width and twice the soldier's length, and had clods of dirt with worms inside of it in the middle of the footprint. And as soon as his native friend saw it, he got goosebumps and shivers down his spine, and basically told them with some sixth sense that they have to leave at all cost, which he took to heart. You also have another Special Forces soldier basically tell Mac about how one time he was tracking out by some enemy base and out by this village area, and he'd found this small forest which was 100 7-foot tall bamboo poles that had various severed heads just piked on top of each bamboo pole. They were in various stages of decay. Some of them were just almost pure white skulls. Other ones were sort of flaky skin, and then other ones were straight up fresh, as if the kills had just been made a few days ago or even a few hours ago. So all these stories basically start ramping up the tension within Mac, because he gets a sense that this thing might be hunting him down, and for some reason he's been marked. And this demon-like figure may not just be urban legends, there might be some reality to it. And you see how that plays out during the climax, when eventually two fates have to meet. And yeah, believe me, when you actually do get a full-blown encounter with this creature later in the story, you guys will not be ready, because yeah, you get some cool little action scenes and stuff, but there's a scene which is like a full description of the creature. And I initially started getting a little bit hesitant about where this story was going. I was like, okay, like this is in some places going down some fairy tale routes, and it kind of felt all over the place. But when you finally get to encounter what this thing is, it is the way Tim Curran does description. It's almost like you're face to face with a primordial war god. I don't know if you guys know about the scene where you encounter the creature in Antlers 2021, the movie, when the main characters encounter the Wendigo. That level of visual and fear is kind of a similar expectation you get with this book, except in this book it's ramped up. So let me just play a clip from that movie if I can find it. If not, it is what it is. And just imagine that on steroids involving this book. So yeah, the entity in question in this book is fantastic. When you do get scenes involving it, lore involving it, it is very good. I enjoy those a lot, and it satisfied me quite a bit. But this problem in the book is prevalent throughout it, and the problem is regarding how this book is kind of all over the place. This book almost felt disorganized at certain points. You know, this is a novella. It's around 60-something pages, and I had said before that I feel like Tim Curran is really good with shorter fiction, and I'd heard some other people that I respect, such as Leon the Paperback Maniac, one of my favorite horror YouTubers. Hope you come back to the field, buddy. He had talked about how Tim Curran with longer works can sort of get repetitive and a little bit lost in thought at certain points. You kind of saw that a little bit with his book, The Dead Sea, which I had read and reviewed. Go check out that video on my channel. But relatively compared to this novella, The Dead Sea seemed to be more organized and seemed to be more focused, which I was surprised by, because that book is 470-something pages, more than 6-7 times the length of this one. And that one felt more on track, while this one, it kind of jumps between human atrocities with what's going on in the Vietnam War, breakdown of units and divisions, and then cuts back to the horror with the actual entity in question, the Headhunter, devil that hunts heads. He just wanted to write a Vietnam War story with some horror sprinkled in there. It didn't feel like the horror was the focus of it, which is fine at certain points, but I feel like there needs to be more structure. You know, it just kind of felt a little bit all over the place. And when you do get to some of the horror scenes later on, it did feel a little bit anticlimactic, not as active with the action as I thought it would be. So yeah, this was a weaker work of his, but I do have to say the positives of this book is that there is vivid descriptions of gore. It can get very violent at time. The urban legend stuff involving Vietnam is very good. I love the setting of Vietnam because, again, you'll hear stories from many Vietnam War veterans. They have stuff that they often don't want to talk about because it's unexplainable or supernatural or weird in nature, that people would think that they're crazy if they talked about it. And the truth is, we will never know the truth about some of their stories because we were not out there in the field to experience it. But sometimes the emotion behind what they talk about, how reluctant some people can be, it really makes you think, because the Vietnam jungle really is impenetrable. It is the heart of wilderness. Tim Curran is always in his bag when it comes to creature feature. His imagination really shines through, his creativity shines through, and you can tell he's in his bag because he does such vivid descriptions that it really sort of gets under your skin and shocks you. So yeah, overall I'd probably give this novella a 7.2 out of 10. It is decent. I gave it a little bit higher because it's got a little bit of like better scenes in it. Again, the pacing and the structure and the disorganization kind of takes me out of it, but the scenes that were good, so I have to give credit there. And again, this novella is going to be memorable, and he's written better stuff, but the fact that a lot of people kind of agree that this is one of his weaker works and it still managed to be decent, yeah, I'm happy with placing Tim Curran in my Mount Rushmore of horror right now. And I'm going to be looking forward to more stuff to read by him, including the next novel, which is going to be the next review of mine. That's all I got for today. If you enjoyed, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and comment down below. Have you checked out Tim Curran? Why or why not? If not, what the fuck is wrong with you? Go pick up something by him and start reading it, especially if you're a horror fan. And yeah, have a nice day. Have a blessed day. Hope to see you guys again. And that's all. Deuces.
Arrivederci.